The green beans were still warm when my sister pushed back from the table. I remember that detail because I had made them, blanched and finished in butter the way my mother always requested, and I was reaching across to pass them to my father when Corinne set down her wine glass with a precision that made everyone look up at once. My name is Willa Grayson, and I had been married for 4 years to a man I believed in completely, sitting at a family dinner table I had sat at my entire life, when my younger sister looked directly at me and said the words that collapsed everything in under 30 seconds. She said I was pregnant. She said she knew because her husband had told her. She said it with the steady, rehearsed calm of someone who had been building toward this moment for longer than one evening. The table went absolutely silent. I felt the air leave my lungs. Not from guilt, from the particular shock of being accused of something so specific and so false that your mind needs a full second just to confirm it isn't real. I looked at Corinne, then at my parents. My mother tilted her head slightly. My father picked up his fork. And my husband, seated to my left, pushed his chair back from the table and would not look at me. Marcus didn't say a word on the drive home. I tried twice. Once at the first red light, once when we pulled into the driveway. Both times he held up a single hand, not angry, which was somehow worse. Just closed, like a door that had already been locked from the inside. He slept in the guest room. I lay on my side of our bed listening to the house settle around me, and I ran the evening backward through my mind. Every expression, every pause, every careful placement of Corinne's wine glass, and I understood that what had happened at that table had not been spontaneous. It had been arranged. Marcus left before I woke up. A single text at 6:14 a.m. that said he needed space to think. No punctuation. The kind of message someone composes when they've already made their decision and just need the words to be technically neutral. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. I didn't cry. I made coffee I didn't drink, and I thought about Corinne's husband, my brother-in-law Reed, who I had spoken to perhaps 40 times in 3 years, mostly at holidays, mostly in groups, never once alone. I thought about what it takes to build a lie that specific. And I thought about who benefits when a marriage breaks quietly and a sister disappears from a family without anyone asking too many questions. I called my mother on Monday, not because I expected comfort, because I needed to hear exactly how far this had already traveled, how deep the story had been planted before Corinne ever said a word at that dinner table. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm in the careful way voices get when someone has already chosen a side and is managing the guilt of it. She asked how I was. I told her I was confused and hurt, and that what Corinne had said was completely untrue. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Willa, honey, why would Corinne make something like that up?" That was the whole answer, wrapped in a question, delivered with the gentle finality of a woman who had already filed me under difficult and moved on. My father was worse. He called that evening unprompted and spent 11 minutes explaining that family conflict always has two sides, and that Reed was a good man with a stable career, and that I needed to consider what I might have done, even unintentionally, to create this kind of misunderstanding. I let him finish. I said goodnight. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my house, Marcus still gone, his closet half empty, his coffee mug still on the counter, and I felt something shift inside me from hurt into something sharper and more focused. I started paying attention differently after that. The hospital called on a Wednesday morning, 14 days after the dinner. The number was from St. Emmett's Medical Center, the hospital 4 miles from my parents' house, the one our family had used my entire life. The woman who called was polite and precise. She asked if I was Willa Grayson. She confirmed my date of birth. Then she said something I have replayed in my mind every day since. "Ma'am, we need you to come in. Please come alone." I drove there in 11 minutes. A patient coordinator met me at the front desk and walked me to a private consultation room, the kind with upholstered chairs and a box of tissues on the table and no windows. The kind of room that exists specifically for difficult conversations. A doctor came in 2 minutes later. She sat across from me and she opened a folder and she explained, quietly and carefully, that a genetic screening had been processed through their lab, one ordered 6 weeks ago by a private physician, and that the results had triggered a mandatory disclosure protocol because of what they contained. She slid a single page across the table. I read it twice. Then I sat very still and understood that what Corinne had done at that dinner table wasn't just a lie designed to destroy my marriage. It was a distraction. Something far larger had been happening, and my sister had needed me looking the wrong direction while it did. The genetic screening wasn't mine. It had been ordered under my name, my full name, my date of birth, my insurance information, by a physician whose practice I had never visited, for a test I had never consented to. The results had been routed to St. Emmett's because of a billing error that the private clinic had been trying quietly to correct for 3 weeks before someone in compliance decided it required disclosure. The DNA profile in that file belonged to a fetus. Corinne's fetus. The patient coordinator explained it carefully, watching my face the whole time. The test had been run to confirm paternity. The result was flagged because the paternity result was inconclusive for the listed father, Reed, but showed a near-certain biological match to another male donor whose profile was already in a medical database. She slid a second page across the table. I looked at the name on it for a long time. Marcus Grayson. My husband. I didn't speak for what felt like several minutes. The doctor sat with me in that silence without trying to fill it, which I will always be grateful for. Corinne wasn't pregnant by Marcus, but she had been trying to find out if she was. She had filed the test under my identity to keep it hidden from Reed. And the dinner, the accusation, the performance, the perfectly timed destruction of my marriage had been her way of cutting me out before I ever had the chance to find out. I left the hospital with 2 certified copies of everything. Patricia had been my family attorney for 6 years. I know, same name, different woman, a small detail that felt almost cruel given the circumstances. She was methodical and she was fast, and when I laid the documents on her desk and explained what I knew, she didn't react with shock. She reacted with the focused stillness of someone calculating how many separate legal actions a single set of facts can support. The answer, it turned out, was 4. Identity fraud, insurance fraud, defamation, and a civil action against both Corinne and Reed for damages resulting from the deliberate destruction of my marriage under false pretense. Marcus called that evening. His voice was different, quieter, stripped of the careful distance he'd been maintaining for 2 weeks. Someone had already contacted him. I didn't ask who. I told him I needed 3 more days before I was ready to talk, and he said okay in the way people say okay when they understand they have no right to ask for anything faster. I spent those 3 days building everything Patricia needed. Phone records, dinner receipts, a timeline documented with the kind of detail that comes from 14 days of paying attention to every small thing. On the 3rd evening, I called my parents. Not to warn them, not to explain. I called because I wanted them to hear my voice one last time before everything they thought they knew about their family rearranged itself permanently. Patricia filed on a Friday morning. By noon, Corinne had been served at her workplace, a medical administration office where she managed patient records, which added a dimension of professional consequence that Patricia noted in the filing with particular precision. Reed was served at home. The process server noted that he stood in the doorway for a long time before accepting the documents. The identity and insurance fraud referrals went to the state attorney's office the same day. Those weren't Patricia's filings. Those came from St. Emmett's compliance department, who had their own obligations once the disclosure had been made and the fraudulent registration confirmed. My parents called 4 times between Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. I let every call go to voicemail and listened to them afterward in order. The first was confused. The second was defensive. The third was my mother crying in a way that sounded genuine and probably was grief when the version of your child you decided on turns out to be wrong, is real even if the decision was cruel. The fourth was my father. He didn't cry. He said he was sorry. Just that. 11 seconds of voicemail, no explanation, no qualifier attached to the apology. I saved that one. Marcus came over Saturday evening. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours and talked with the careful honesty of 2 people who had been ambushed by someone else's secret and were trying to figure out what, if anything, was still intact. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an honest conversation. That felt like enough for one night. The legal process took 8 months. Corinne pleaded no contest to identity fraud and insurance fraud. Her employment in medical administration was terminated before the plea was even entered. Her employer moved fast once the nature of the charges became clear. Reed filed for divorce 3 weeks after service, which surprised no one except possibly Reed himself, who seemed to have believed until the very end that the situation was still manageable. It wasn't. Marcus and I went to counseling, not because the marriage was certain, but because we were both honest enough to admit we didn't know yet, and that not knowing deserved more respect than a clean, easy ending. We met every Thursday evening with a woman named Dr. Carla Osei, who had no patience for performance and considerable patience for silence. 8 months in, we were still going. My parents came to my house in April. Both of them. My father carried a dish my mother had made, the green beans, blanched and finished in butter, and set it on my counter without a word. My mother sat at my kitchen table and said she had chosen the easier thing over the true thing, and that she was ashamed of it. I made coffee. We sat together for 2 hours. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was the beginning of something that might become forgiveness if we were all patient enough and honest enough to let it. I thought about that dinner. The wine glass. The silence. The moment everything broke open. And I thought about how the truth, when it finally arrives, doesn't always come gently, but it always comes.